I'm Lauren Conlin, and I am going back to the early 2000s today amid the release of the Laci Peterson documentary on Netflix and the upcoming documentary on Peacock, which will be released on August 20th, where Scott Peterson is actually interviewed. Gross. I'm not sure what else he can possibly say at this point, but let's see. I will be watching and I will have to take some kind of anti nausea pill because Scott makes me want to gag and vomit all at once. But let's get this out of the way. Go and rewatch all of the interviews and interactions with Scott Peterson from the early 2000s. He is not a concerned husband or a concerned father. He has no sense of urgency and he just doesn't care. Who leaves their full term pregnant wife anyway to go fishing on Christmas Eve? And remember, it was too cold to golf, per Scott. But yeah, not too cold to go fishing. No, sir. Let's rewind back to 2002, December 24th. It's Christmas Eve in Modesto, California, and Laci Peterson, who is 8 months pregnant, is supposedly out walking her dog while her doting husband Scott is busy fishing at the Berkeley Marina. He actually kept the story that he was golfing to certain people, which was odd, but we will get to that later. But the claim of Laci walking her dog was actually debunked because Laci hadn't walked her dog in weeks per doctor's orders. Laci was at the end of her pregnancy. She didn't feel great. So her doctor, her mom, and a handful of others confirmed that she would not have been out walking her dog on this long walk. But nevertheless, the dog comes home all muddy and leashless. But Laci, nowhere to be found. Scott claims he came home, didn't see her. He casually called out, "Hey, Laci, are you home?" He then washed his own clothes in the washing machine, took a shower, ate a piece of pizza, had some milk, and called Laci's mom. But per phone records, he doesn't call Laci. Weird, right? Let's call everyone except Laci, even though her car is there along with her wallet. Oh, and he also says, "Yeah, I assume she's at her mom's," without her car. Okay. By 5:15 p.m., Laci's stepdad calls the police and the search begins. And also remember, Laci's stepdad calls police, not Scott. Scott also referred to Laci as, quote, "missing." Now, that's not exactly where my mind would go if my spouse wasn't home when I arrived home, but yeah, Scott said she's missing. So, from the jump, Scott's behavior is weird AF. First, he tells people he was golfing that morning, then whoops, it wasn't golfing, it was fishing. Classic mistake, right? And obviously, where do you go on Christmas Eve if you're going to go fishing? Just to a marina 90 miles away from your house. There's nothing strange about that. I mean, no, not at all. Not to me. Especially when your wife is clearly a month from giving birth. You're going to go that far? Now, police show up to the house, neighbors, everybody is very concerned. Where is Laci? So the police are talking to Scott, and Scott appears to be cool, calm, and collected. You know, they're looking around the house. Scott's allowing them to do so. And they're looking in Scott's truck, and they find a tarp, several unused fishing rods, and what was described as a homemade concrete anchor. He also says, "Oh, I have some umbrellas," that he shows them. And then, without being asked, Scott reveals a receipt that shows that he entered the Berkeley Marina at 12:54 p.m. So, during Peterson's initial interview with police, he does state, "Oh, it was too cold to golf, so he decided to go fishing instead." I still cannot get over that. Why would it be okay to go fishing and not golf if it was too cold? It makes no sense to me. And why he perpetuated this golf lie to some of his friends and neighbors is also unclear. And he also suggested to police during his initial interviews that Laci could have been kidnapped or robbed because she wore expensive jewelry. And then he asked police if they would be using cadaver dogs to find his pregnant wife. And the police were like, no, why are you assuming she's dead? We haven't really gone there yet. I mean, what? So, even the most skilled true crime writer could not have predicted the events that were about to unfold. So, on December 30th, 2002, a massage therapist named Amber Fry contacted police after seeing Scott Peterson on the news begging for his wife to come home. Fry told police she was shocked. She had been dating Scott Peterson since the beginning of November. They had picked out a Christmas tree together. They attended a Christmas party together. And Peterson at one point had even picked up Fry's young daughter from daycare. So Peterson had told Fry that his wife had died and this would be his first holiday without her. And I will get more into that later. But Fry agreed to record her calls with Peterson at the direction of police in order to assist with the search for Laci. And this is so gross, but on New Year's Eve, a vigil for Laci was held, packed with media, family, friends, Good Samaritans. And Peterson called Amber Fry from the vigil, and he said, "Oh, I'm in Paris at the Eiffel Tower. I can't wait to see you." That is just truly despicable. I mean, this is all too much to ignore. So Amber's friend had found out that Scott Peterson was married, and he had threatened to tell Amber if Scott didn't. And he told this to Scott. He called Scott and said, "Look, if you don't tell her, I'm going to tell her." This was on December 8th or 9th. And Scott said, "Okay, I'll tell her." Well, the same day that Amber's friend threatens this, Scott Googles the tides at the Berkeley Marina. Okay, this would be him planning ahead. And then, again, when he does tell Amber that he, quote, lost his wife and would be the first Christmas without her, Laci didn't go missing until the 24th. Remember that? So at one point during these recorded calls between Amber and Scott, Amber freaks out and she's like, "Scott, how could you have lost your wife on December 9th when she didn't go missing until the 24th? Okay, because you were planning it and you knew." I mean, that's just me talking, but yeah. So when police confronted Scott Peterson with a photo of he and Amber Fry, and it's that famous photo of them where she's in the red dress, and Scott Peterson literally denied that it was him in the photo. You can't make this up. So Amber Fry soon came forward and held a press conference. And then Peterson was forced to admit this affair. And in the famous interview he did with Diane Sawyer, he claimed that Laci knew about the affair and was, quote, fine with it. And like many of the viewers, Diane Sawyer had a really hard time believing that a very emotional 8-month pregnant woman would be so understanding about her husband's infidelity. So at this point, police have now zeroed in on Scott Peterson and kicked things up a notch in the investigation. And after his affair with Amber Fry came out and he refused a lie detector, Laci's family was like, "Okay, we can no longer support you, Scott Peterson. We're out." So police receive a warrant to track Scott's vehicles, and they implement a camera outside of the Peterson home. And it was discovered that the month following Laci's disappearance, he had driven to the Berkeley Marina, which again is 90 miles away from Modesto, 5 separate times while driving a different rental car. One day he drove a Subaru, the next day he drove a Honda. And then police also discovered that Scott Peterson had sold Laci's car, and he began having conversations to sell their home on Covina Avenue. He turned the nursery for Connor into a storage room, and he even canceled their TV services. One could speculate that he was not expecting his family to return home. And over the next few months, Scott Peterson appeared to show very little interest in finding his pregnant wife. And then tragically, in April of 2003, the bodies of both Laci and her unborn son Connor washed ashore after a storm swept the Bay Area. The bodies were estimated to be in water between 3 and 6 months, and because of the conditions, a cause of death could not be determined. Laci's mother contacted Scott Peterson to inform him about his wife, and he did not return her call. DNA proved that it was, in fact, Laci. And again, just to make this clear, their bodies were found where Scott was fishing. Additionally, at this point, Scott Peterson had this new appearance that appeared to raise some eyebrows. He had dyed his hair bleach blonde. He grew a goatee, which is, perfectly normal to undergo this makeover while your pregnant wife is missing. So, at this point, police are like, oh my gosh, he might flee. And now they have enough evidence to have him arrested because they have a body. And they appear to be correct. Upon his arrest, police discovered that Peterson was on the run to Mexico. He had multiple cell phones in his possession, a gun, camping gear, extra clothes, 2 driver's licenses, including one that belonged to his brother, foreign currency, and almost $15,000 in cash. It was also reported that after his arrest, Peterson casually asked police if they'd get him a burger and a milkshake. Ew, okay. So the theory of the prosecution, or one of the theories, was that Laci's murder was also partially financially motivated. Peterson had racked up almost $25,000 in debt, and the jewelry that Laci had recently had appraised was worth over $100,000, and she had recently inherited this jewelry. Also, witnesses came forward stating that Peterson was not looking forward to becoming a father, and he would openly make comments about it. We also know about Amber Frey. He was having an affair, and most likely, if it wasn't with Amber, he would probably go on to have other affairs, judging by his behavior. Police also learned that Peterson never registered his fishing boat or even told his father-in-law about the purchase, who was an avid fisherman, always inviting him out. They believe that Peterson possibly killed Laci on the evening of December 23rd, disposed her body at the marina on December 24th, and then let the dog out himself to support his story. The lies, the concerning behavior, the search dogs, Amber Frey, it was all mounting evidence. The defense argued that Peterson was not a murderer, but a sex addict who was just a serial cheater. They also argued that police never investigated any possible suspects besides Peterson, but they did. They followed through on the leads about a burglary that was right next door and occurred obviously in the neighborhood the week of Laci's disappearance, but Scott's defense team argued otherwise. And Scott Peterson was eventually convicted on 2 counts of murder and was sentenced to death. The death sentence was later overturned in 2020, and Peterson received life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, it's been reported that he's living quite the easy life and comfortable life while in prison. And per ABC News, this report by Greg Matchik, the case and conviction against Scott Peterson was based on circumstantial evidence, which we know, and this was given the same weight as direct evidence under the law. And the jury clearly felt like the prosecution presented their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So why, over 20 years later, is the Innocence Project of LA filing motions on Peterson's behalf to get him a new trial? Shortly after Laci's disappearance, the Modesto Fire Department was called to the scene of an arson fire of a van about a mile from Covina Avenue, where the Petersons lived. Inside the van was a piece of fabric with a, quote, rust-colored stain. The Innocence Project has filed a court order to get the fabric tested for DNA, which a judge recently approved, which could support the initial defense theory about Laci potentially walking in on a neighborhood burglary and being killed for it. The arson would be the attempt to destroy possible evidence of a cover-up. I don't buy this at all. But according to a 2024 Nightline special, a detective stated that the 2 men were arrested and charged for the burglary in question and cleared of any involvement in Laci and Connor's death. And this is true. You can look this up anywhere, but the Peterson family is still pushing this theory, and it's beyond frustrating. It's also worth mentioning that an author, Donna Thomas, which is said to be a pen name, released a book in 2009, and that's called I'm Sorry I Lied to You, The Confession of Scott Peterson. Thomas claims she was romantically involved with Peterson and was able to elicit his confession while visiting him at San Quentin. And take that for what you will. I don't know who this woman is, but I thought it was worth a mention. So the Innocence Project, they also claim there was a very, very reliable witness who did in fact see Laci walking her dog the morning of December 24th, 2002, and that witness was never interviewed by police. I don't see how this is true because the defense in his initial trial said there were 11 witnesses that originally saw Laci, and none of them spoke during the trial because this was debunked by the prosecution for a number of reasons. Again, Laci was not supposed to be walking her dog. She stopped walking the dog weeks prior, and the witnesses that the defense had, they all had different times they allegedly saw Laci, and she wasn't wearing the clothes that she was found when they pulled her out of the water. She was found in, or her torso, I guess, was found in khaki pants, and these witnesses saw a woman in all black. And look, I will eat my words if anything comes out and the new DNA testing proves something different, but as of right now, no. Scott Peterson is 100% guilty to me. And I also understand that everybody acts different or differently amid a tragedy. But I will tell you one thing. I would not act like Scott Peterson did. But let's pump the brakes on Scott for a second and talk about another missing woman from just a few months earlier, prior to Laci. Evelyn Hernandez. And I bet some of you have never heard her name, and that's a problem. So Evelyn was a 24-year-old mother living in San Francisco with her 5-year-old son, Alex. She was also pregnant with her second child, a baby boy she planned to name Fernando. Unlike Laci, Evelyn was an immigrant from El Salvador, and she was working super hard to provide for her little family, and she had a boyfriend, Herman Aguilera, which sounds nice, except for the tiny detail that he was married and not thrilled about Evelyn being pregnant. On May 1st, 2002, Evelyn and Alex vanished. Her wallet was later found with cash still in it, and months later, a mutilated body washed up in the same bay as Laci Peterson, just legs and a torso. DNA confirmed it was Evelyn, but Alex was never found. The police didn't think much of it at first. They assumed maybe she ran away with her son, and the media, well, it was crickets. And we all know when Laci disappeared, she was on every news channel and every magazine cover. And yeah, Evelyn only got a handful of local reports even after her body was found. No national coverage, no hotlines, no Amber Alerts for little Alex. Nothing. And you can't help but wonder why. Why was Evelyn practically invisible? So let's be real for a minute. When Evelyn went missing, police initially leaned into the stereotypes. She was a single mom, her family was back in El Salvador, and she was in this complicated relationship with a man who clearly was not ready to step up. But this is where things get truly frustrating. Evelyn's boyfriend, Herman Aguilera, who was married, he got lawyered up really, really quickly when police started sniffing around, and he had his wife provide an alibi, even though the details surrounding that alibi are very fuzzy. To this day, no one has been charged in Evelyn's murder, and her case remains open. Meanwhile, we know Scott, his face was on every magazine, every news outlet, and we got every detail in the Laci Peterson case, right down to her grocery receipts. So this is just truly sad to me because Evelyn's son, he barely got a whisper. And listen, Laci's story completely deserves to be told, but so does Evelyn's. And while Scott rots in prison, which I am thrilled about, somewhere out there, a killer is still free and a young boy named Alex is still missing. So let's keep Evelyn's name in the conversation because every victim does deserve to be more than a forgotten headline. But let's go back to Scott Peterson again and his guilt. Because with the Innocence Project and all of these documentaries coming out, I want to bullet point the many reasons as to why he is guilty. Inconsistent alibis. Initially, he claimed he was golfing on the morning of Laci's disappearance. Then, I'm changing it to fishing at the Berkeley Marina, raising suspicions immediately. An affair with Amber Frey and being able to lie so easily. He called Amber from Laci's vigil, claiming to be in Paris when he was actually at an event for his, quote, missing wife. One could argue that's sociopathic behavior. And speaking of sociopathic and suspicious behavior, after Laci's disappearance, Scott was emotionless, eerily calm during police interviews and press conferences. He displayed very little interest in the search for Laci, focusing on avoiding the media when somebody whose family members are missing usually beg for the media. He was focused on avoiding it because he wanted to maintain his secret affair. He tried to sell Laci's car, discussed selling their house, and even used his unborn son's nursery as a storage room. Laci and Connor's body washed up near the exact spot where Scott claimed he was fishing on the day she disappeared, the Berkeley Marina. Scott purchased a boat shortly before Laci went missing, which he never mentioned to his family or friends, and it was never registered. A homemade concrete anchor was found in Scott's possession, suggesting it could have been used to weigh Laci's body down in the bay. Pliers in Scott's boat were found with a clump of hair matching Laci's maternal DNA. Security footage showed Scott entering the Berkeley Marina at 12:54 p.m. on December 24th, 2002, which was the exact time he claimed to be, quote, fishing. He made multiple trips back to the marina in the following weeks, driving different rental cars to avoid being tracked. Search dogs actually detected Laci's scent on a path leading directly from the Peterson home to the dock where Scott launched his boat. Scott was arrested with dyed hair, a goatee, $15,000 in cash, camping gear, multiple cell phones, his brother's driver's license, suggesting he was planning to flee. Scott asked police early on if they were using cadaver dogs, even though no one was yet considering Laci deceased except for him. He also canceled their TV services as if he never expected his wife and unborn son to return home. Amber Frey's testimony, incredibly damning, plus all of the recorded calls, providing damning evidence of Scott's lies and his lack of concern for Laci's fate as he focused more on keeping his affair under wraps. Oh, and then we have the jury's verdict. Despite the defense claiming, this is only circumstantial evidence, the jury unanimously found Scott guilty based on the mountain of suspicious behaviors, conflicting statements, and incriminating actions. Okay, guys, I know that a lot of this might have been a little jumbled up and me just ranting, but I put this episode together a bit last minute after watching the Laci Peterson documentary on Netflix by Skye Borgman, who I love. She's a great director. I just got so upset all over again because of his disgusting behavior. But I will be watching on August 20th the Peacock documentary where Scott speaks. I cannot imagine that he has anything relevant to say or anything that I will give two shits about, but we will see. And I will hop back on and do another episode after. All right, guys, thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, don't forget to rate and subscribe on Apple or wherever you listen. Subscribe to my YouTube, Pop Crime TV, and I'll be back later this week with another episode. I'm Lauren Conlin. Until next time.